God has called us to fight the evil around us, to speak out, to speak the truth, that there are innumerable people whose lives depend on the church speaking fearlessly. If we don't wake up to that, we are now on track to go in exactly the same direction as Germany went in the 30s.
Letter to the American Church. Eric, is this book really just a response to all the people who rag on you on Twitter?
The fact of the matter is that this book, Letter to the American Church, is so serious, it's hard for me even to talk about it because, let me put it this way, never in my life have I felt that God called me to write something. Like, it was kind of a strange urgency that I felt, because in a nutshell, we know that the country is going crazy, it's falling apart, and I came to the conviction that it's the silence of the American church that precisely parallels the silence of the German church in the 1930s that has allowed these things to happen. In other words, I believe that God had called me to write the book on Dietrich Bonhoeffer to show the story of what happens when the church hesitates, when the church says, we don't think we should be political, when the church is persuaded to just, quote unquote, preach the gospel, stick to theological stuff. If the church is persuaded to be silent, or some of the church is persuaded to be silent, what happened in Germany, we saw, is it's an unimaginable evil. And I say unimaginable because the Germans at the time themselves could not imagine it.
No.
They never dreamt that anything could lead to such satanic horrors. Well, it did, and we know that. And so when I wrote the Bonhoeffer book, I was thinking about this country, and as the years have passed, I have seen the silence of the American church effectively lead us to precisely the same path as Germany in the 30s.
Let's talk about things that were unimaginable a few years ago. When Bruce Jenner announced he wanted to be Caitlyn, if any of us had said they're going to be castrating kids and grooming kids and recruiting them in schools and cutting off girls' healthy breasts, and Vanderbilt University Hospital is going to be making millions of dollars off of it and firing people who won't go along with it, and you're going to be kicked off of social media if you're transphobic, if you don't use imaginary made-up pronouns for people to reflect biological sexes that don't exist, and we're going to have drag queens in the White House and Satanist S&M psychotics as monkeypox czar. By the way, monkeypox is going to be a thing, and you won't be able to criticize people for going to orgies and spreading it, but we're going to close your church because of a cold.
John, listen, there are people who get this, right? And most of them are watching us, and the people who don't believe this or who don't want to hear it, maybe they're not watching us. And I would say I wrote the book.
Let's talk about them.
But I wrote the book for those people in the sense that I think that we all know people who have been somehow persuaded that I just need not to be political, I need not to be. They've somehow been persuaded. Some of them have been bullied into it, so it's pure fear. Some of them are sucking up to, they want to be part of some in-group, and so they know if I talk about that, I will be cast out of that in-group.
You won't be invited on Krista Tippett's NPR radio show. You won't get featured in the Washington Post style section.
Right.
You will not be invited back to the White House.
Right.
Your books will not be sold in the airport
well,
on the DC shuttle.
That's kind of the point. In other words, there are all these reasons that people are being silent. But I'm convinced, the reason I wrote the book Letter to the American Church is that I'm convinced there are people who have simply not heard that the reason the German church was silent in the face of evil, which led to such horrors, the reasons are dramatically similar today for the silence of the church. So I've never written a book specifically for Christians until this book, where I say, if we in the church in the United States do not wake up, that God has called us to fight the evil around us, to speak out, to speak the truth, that there are innumerable people whose lives depend on the church speaking fearlessly. If we don't wake up to that, we are now on track to go in exactly the same direction as Germany went in the 30s. That sounds like hyperbole, but I'm here to tell you folks, to the Germans, those things were unimaginable. They never dreamt that their silence in the early 30s and the mid 30s could conceivably have led to what it led to. And I'm here to say that there are just as many Americans today who can't possibly fathom that their silence on all of these issues, silence in the pulpits, silence beyond the pulpits, that could lead to satanic evil triumphing.
But the thing is, we're not in 1932 anymore, where all those Nazis, they're kind of got crazy ideas, but they'll calm down once they're in power. We're in like 1936, where the Nuremberg race laws have been passed. We've got schools grooming kids to castrate them. We've got national medical organizations saying we have to recognize that eunuch is a new gender.
Well, I mean, look, the parallels are everywhere. What you just said, okay, there was this thing called Nazi science, right? In other words, they basically said, that's Jewish science, and we're going to have Nazi science, and it's going to be pure Aryan science, which is like saying, you know, I'm going to have Greek math, and you're going to have, you know, a Polish geography. I mean, it's lunacy, but it happened in Germany. It has happened around the world.
Now we have woke science and woke literature, and woke is every bit as ideological and as deranged, and every bit is driven by racial hatred. The woke ideology is a Marxist construct that focuses on organizing people to racial hatred and class hatred.
Well, that's right.
Upper class whites are supposed to hate all the rest of the whites, and everybody is supposed to hate the deplorables who vote for God and country and gun rights and family. Those are the demons. They are the Tutsi cockroaches that they want to exterminate. They are the kulaks that they want to hang. They are the scapegoat. And what the woke ideology is a scapegoating mechanism that allows one group of very rich, very powerful people to blame all our problems on people who are relatively helpless. People like Kyle Rittenhouse, people like Jake Gardner, people like the January 6th defendants, people like Mike Lindell, people who the regime is targeting.
Okay, so this is basically the point, right? You have these cultural elites that are demonizing, you can say Trump supporters, you could say white evangelicals, whatever you want to call them, working class, Walmart deplorables, but they're demonizing them in a way that is remarkably similar to the ways that the Jews were initially demonized in Germany. And the thing is, you didn't think it could happen in America. It's happening in America. But the point of the book is that it is up to the church, those who dare to call themselves Christians, to speak against these evils. And what I try to say in the book is that not to speak against these things is to allow evil to triumph. There's a chapter in the book called 12,000 Pastors, where I basically say that there were 3,000 heroes of these 18,000 Protestant pastors. There were 3,000 heroes who spoke up bravely. Bonhoeffer, of course,
against
one of the leaders, against the Nazis. And on the other end of the spectrum, there were 3,000 who were radically pro-Hitler pastors, if you can believe it, right? But in the middle, there were 12,000 pastors who basically said, you know what? We're going to sit this one out. We're going to see which way the wind blows. We're just going to, quote unquote, preach the gospel from our pulpits. We don't want to get involved in that political stuff. It was because of the silence, the fear, the cowardice, the theological confusion of those 12,000 pastors that allowed evil to triumph. And the parallel to pastors in America today is astonishing. It is real. I cannot underscore this enough. I'm not speaking hyperbolically. The parallel to what happened to the German church in Germany, which led to the evil, is precisely where we are today in America. And I wrote the book hoping to reach some of those pastors in the middle who really think that they're taking the safe course. You're not taking the safe course. You're allowing evil to triumph.
There's a famous anecdote which you mention in the book, which may or may not be literal, about a church congregation on a Sunday in Germany, and a trainload of Jews being sent to the concentration camps got stuck on the tracks, and the people were screaming for someone to help them. And what did the church do? They sang louder to drown out the screams of the innocent victims on their way to the death camps. If you're a pastor in New York City, where more than half of black unborn babies is aborted, more than half, and you're not talking about that, you're not helping with a crisis pregnancy center, you're not supporting pro-life candidates for public office, then you are singing a little louder on near the train tracks to Auschwitz, and you are a coward, and you should find something else to do with your life. Go earn an honest living, but don't pretend you're a Christian pastor.
I want to deal with the story of the people singing louder, and then I want to.
And there's a film of it, by the way. If you want to look on YouTube, Sing a Little Louder. They made a very powerful dramatization of it.
It strikes me as possibly an apocryphal story, but the idea, okay, applies to exactly something that Bonhoeffer said, which I quote in the book. He basically said, listen, unless you're willing to speak out for the Jews, as a German in Germany, right, as a German Christian who is not Jewish, if you do not speak out against what the Nazis are doing to the Jews, you have no right to sing Gregorian chants. You have no right to go to church and worship God. God requires you to speak the truth. There's a famous scripture, obedience is better than sacrifice. In other words, whatever it is that God asks you to do, you do that thing. And when God asks you to speak the truth, you speak the truth. You don't say, well, I'm not good at that. Let me just preach the gospel. That's what the German church basically did. They said, look, we're just going to worship God. We're going to pray. We're going to keep our nose out of these political conversations. And what I try to say in this book, and what I think the story of Bonhoeffer illustrates, is that no, God required his church in Germany to confront this evil head on. If they had done it, he would have given them the victory. The Nazis never could have triumphed if the church had thrown aside what Bonhoeffer angrily called these theologically based objections, he said, which is only fear. If the church had actually bravely behaved as though they believed what they claimed to believe, that Jesus defeated death on the cross and we are free and we must speak the truth. If they had done that, the Nazis could not have triumphed. And in our own day, we're seeing exactly, especially in the evangelical church, this argument that we're not supposed to be political. And it's completely unbiblical.
I love the way the people who make this argument, oh, we can't engage in politics, they all love Martin Luther King. Well, letter to the Birmingham church, letter from a Birmingham jail, is aimed at people like this.
That's right.
He talks about the so-called white moderates. He talks about the black pastors who are silent about civil rights. And he condemns them as being like the teachers, the preachers in Germany who didn't condemn the Nazis.
That's right.
So these people who claim to love the civil rights movement, claim to love Martin Luther King, you know, they make a big deal about it on their websites.
Right.
The people with the refugees welcome on their front lawns right next to the security sign with the name of the burglar alarm that will be tripped if any refugees show up, as in Martha's Vineyard. But anyway, these people who love Martin Luther King, they are his enemies.
That's right.
They are the people he was condemning from prison. Did you have in mind the letter from a Birmingham jail when you wrote Letter to the American Church?
Actually, I did not. And sometimes it's embarrassing to realize that I did not. But listen, truth is truth is truth is truth is truth. It's just true. What Bonhoeffer was trying to wake people up, and most people who read my Bonhoeffer book would say, oh, I agree with that. I would have stood with Bonhoeffer. If they read about Dr. King, they go, oh, I agree with that. If they read about Wilberforce and they read about the people who stood against slavery, they don't say, well, that was really political. They should have stayed out of that. They have no problem with politics in the past. There are people that they pick sort of chic things that they can be political about. And then when someone says, well, I need to be political about the unborn, I need to be political about forced vaccines,
the Uyghurs in China,
about speaking against Chinese Marxism, when you say those things, they say, oh, you're being political. And you realize that they're playing a game. It's sophistry.
When I tell these people, you're not even a Pharisee, because some of the Pharisees were sincere and some of them were trying, and that's why Jesus addressed them. You're a Sadducee. You're one of those bought and paid for theological modernists who worked in the temple, who cozied up to the Romans, like Caiaphas, who said, it is expedient that one man die for the sake of the people. Know what I mean?
Well, no, but that's basically it. In other words, I mean, if we really have to define what we're talking about, it's compromising with evil. In other words, God calls us to fight against evil, and even if we lose, he calls us to fight. He calls us to speak truth to power. He calls us to do our best to stand up for those who have no voice. And Bonhoeffer said this over and over. But there are many people that say, you know what, I don't want that. I just want to live my peaceful life. Leave me alone. What do I need to say to be left alone? Yeah. Do I need to hang a Nazi banner outside my church? Fine, no problem. Today, do I need to hang a BLM flag or a rainbow flag? What do I need to do so they won't come for me?
Like the rainbow flag in front of a church is like the blood on the doorpost for Passover. You know?
Yeah. You won't burn my church down because
exactly.
We're good people. We believe in tolerance. But the point is that the parallel, again, this is crazy that this is true, that precisely what happened in Germany during that time is what is happening in America today. So I wrote the book hoping to reach some people that are kind of in the middle. They're not yet, they're not sold on, supporting the globalist Marxist regime. They are open-minded, but they're afraid. Right. They are confused, and they have bought theological lies. That's really the key. In other words, they bought the idea that, listen, you don't need to do anything, just believe in the gospel and you're fine. That's not biblical.
Yeah, this is like if Homer Simpson were being taken to a concentration camp. Ned Flanders would say, I'll pray for you. Yeah. Well, why don't you go lie down in front of the tracks and try to stop the train? I'd like to make an appeal to people out there. Stop selling your soul for pennies on the dollar. It's a buyer's market. Souls are cheap. At least if you're going to sell your soul, wait till the price goes up so you get something for it. But for now, people are selling their soul for a pat on the head for a few likes on Twitter.
That's kind of the point.
Pathetic.
That's kind of the point, is that we're supposed to believe Jesus defeated death on the cross, so we're not supposed to fear death. But we've been so coddled and so blessed and so spoiled in America that we forget that if you believe what the scriptures say, you're supposed to pay a price in life. God will bless you as you pay these prices. But the idea that we can just get along with everybody and I never have to stick my neck out, I really believe that we're going through these hellish times. It's God's mercy trying to wake up those who can be awakened. There are people, finally, I think, who are saying, I had no idea it would get this crazy. This is insane. They're saying men can become women and I can't do this and I can't say that. And this is not America. But those people are looking for leadership from the church. They're expecting church leaders more than anything to have the courage to speak these things. And the church has been generally silent. And I'm convinced, John, that God's judgment is on this nation. In other words, unless the church repents of its silence, things are going to get unimaginably bad. And if you don't believe me, you can read the book for yourself, and because I'm not making it up.
Look at the last few years. Look what they did to Australia. They locked the whole country in their homes. Look what they did to Germany. They locked everyone in their homes. They closed all our churches. Nobody fought back. They're forced people to take a vaccine that was developed using organs ripped out of the living bodies of unborn children, and they lied about it. They took hundreds more unborn babies at the University of Pittsburgh out of their mothers while still alive and harvested their organs for COVID research. We documented that on the stream. Hundreds, funded by the National Institute for Health, when evangelical Christian Francis Collins and Catholic Jesuit graduate Anthony Fauci were in charge. It is already happening. The camps are already running.
But John, most people, see, this is the part of the difficulty, is that most people aren't reading about this. Most people think, what are you talking about? I haven't heard that. the reason you haven't heard it is because of this larger problem. People are refusing to speak about what is happening. They're saying that even to speak about it might get me in trouble. So the self-silencing of supposedly free Americans has led us to this preposterous situation. But I argue that it is mostly the church that is to blame. I know that God called me to write this book for his purposes in history. In other words, I believe that there are enough people who could be persuaded that they must now speak out, that if they don't now begin to speak out, it's over for liberty, for America, certainly for the church. So I am very cautiously hopeful that enough people will see what's going on, will be emboldened to stand. And I almost titled the book, I don't know if I mentioned this, I almost called the book Faith Without Works is Dead. Because I thought to myself, there's so many people that I know that they say, well, I believe, I go to Bible study. And it's like you realize the only reason you're supposed to read or study the Bible is so that you will live what you have studied. In other words, if you don't live what the Bible says, better that you don't read it. You are. It's like taking a communion in a state of sin. You are obliged to live out your faith, and we have this idea, mostly in the evangelical church, that, oh, it's only about faith, it's only about faith. Well, yes, if your faith is genuine, but if your faith is a fig leaf designed to fool God, that I say, well, I believe these creeds and I believe these statements.
Satan believes but trembles.
There you go.
I want to end on a positive note. Letter to the American Church is a wonderful book, a short read, an easy read, a sobering and thought-provoking read. And I'm pretty sure Eric can get you a discount on some pillows or blankets if you use the right code.
You have to use the code. The only problem is you got to use the code ERIC, and it's hard to spell. ERIC.
Sleep well, my friends.